Hello everyone, I'm Snigdha Kakkar and this is my channel AccelerateAICareers. Today we are going to discuss a very interesting question. It's one of the favorites of companies these days, has been asked by several ones in the last 6 to 12 months, some of them being Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Netflix and Salesforce. The question is really interesting, so I would suggest you follow the video along with me and code it alongside. If you have any doubts, any questions, ask them in the comments here. So let's start understanding the question first. What does the question say? The question says that you have been given an array intervals where intervals I is a list which is comprising of start and end of that interval. And you have to merge all overlapping intervals and return an array of non-overlapping intervals that cover all the intervals provided in the input. Let me explain it to you with an example here. So you have been given an input interval here 1, 3, 2, 6, 8, 10, 15, 18, where 1 is the start of the interval, 3 is the end of the interval, and so on. So 2 is the start of the interval, 6 is the end of the interval. Similarly, 15 is the start of the interval and 18 is the end of the interval. And you have to combine these intervals whenever they are overlapping. So if you see 1, 3 and 2, 6 have an overlap of 2, 3, right? So they can be combined together. And how do you combine it? You take the min of 1, 2. So you take the initial start as 1 and you take the max of 3, 6. So you take the start end as 6. So 1, 6 is your new interval. Then 8, 10 and 1, 6 do not have any overlap. So 8, 10 is taken as a separate interval. And then 15, 18 and 8, 10 do not have any overlap. So it's taken as separate. Since intervals 1, 3 and 2, 6 were the only two overlapping intervals, they have been merged into one. Now let's look at example 2. Example 2 says 1, 4 and 4, 5 are your two intervals. Even though there is no overlap, it's just one common point is 4. So the question clarifies with this example that they will be considered as an overlapping interval. So 1, 4 and 4, 5 will be combined into 1, 5 as they have been considered as overlapping ones. Okay. Now it says that for every interval, each of the intervals I length will always be 2. It will have one start and one end. And there are constraints given for intervals length and start and end. These will not impact our solution to that extent. So I'll move forward to our algorithm, how we are going to solve this question. Here I have taken a number line starting from 0 with an interval of 2 between each of the indices. Okay. I have copied example 1 from the question here. And all the inputs intervals given in the example have been shown here. The intervals were 1, 3, 2, 6, 8, 10, 15, 18. My first step in solving any of these examples would be to sort my intervals with start index. Why? Because if you don't know the comparison between start index and prior end index, you cannot actually merge overlapping intervals. So the first step should always be sort all the intervals by using their start index. So 1, 2, 8 and 15 are your start indices of your intervals. So you first sort them out. In this example, they're already sorted, but it might not be the case in other examples. So you first sort them out. After that, you pick up the first interval and its last indices. So the last indices is 3, right? You compare 3 with the start index of next interval in the sorted list. Next interval is 2, 6 and its start index is 2. So you check whether 2 is greater than 3 or less than 3. If 3 is greater than 2, that means there is an overlap. That is, the last index of your first interval is greater than your start index of next interval. If that is the case, there is an overlap and you have to merge. And how do you facilitate that merge? You compare the start indices and take the min, and you compare the end indices and take the max. That's how you do the merge. And if, say, suppose 2, 6 and 8, 10, there is no overlap. You can see 6 is less than 8 and there is no overlap. Then you keep the intervals as is. So your final output returned has 1, 6 because there was an overlap there. 8, 10 because there wasn't an overlap, and 15, 18 because there was not an overlap. And finally, you can return the output. I'll quickly skim through the algorithm. First thing you do is you sort your entire intervals by their start indices. After that, you pick up the first interval, compare its last index with the start index of next interval, and so on. If there is an overlap, then you do the merge. If there is no overlap, in that case, you keep the interval as is. Now we will code it and it might become more clear to you. If you have further doubts, you can ask them in the comments. Now, the first step here would be to sort. Sort with start indices, as I told you in the algorithm walkthrough. So you first sort, and sorting will happen in O of n log n time. So that would be your time complexity of this particular way of solving this question. And how do you sort in Python? It's easier. So you pick up intervals and you dot sort. What is your key? Your key would be lambda I, where your I is the 0. That is the start of your each of the list. If you would have sorted them by end, then it would have been I1 rather than I0. Right now we are sorting by start indices, hence we are using I0. Okay. Now we initialize our output, and I'm not going to initialize it with an empty list. Instead, I'm going to initialize with the sorted list's first input. So 1, 3 would be the first input in example 1, right? So I'm initializing it with that, and I'm going to compare the next going on intervals with this. So for start and end in intervals, but I'm going to compare from first interval onwards because I have already taken the 0th interval as my output starting. And why am I doing it? Because we have already sorted by start indices, right? So the one which is at 0th index will have the min start. So that's why I've taken it as my output initially. Now I will define last end, which would be my current outputs, end indices. End indices can be obtained like this. So at present output has only one value, 1, 3. Its end index is 3. So I have taken that. And output minus 1, that means in your output whatever intervals have been appended, say suppose there are 3 intervals, so it will take the last interval, and of that last interval it will pick up the end index. That's how you get the last end. And you have to compare this last end with the start of next. So if the start of next is less than last end, then there is an overlap, right? In that case you have to merge. So to do the merge, min indices have already been sorted. So you have to just compare the max indices. So output minus 1, 1, that is the last index in your output. You have to do the merge with that last interval in your output. So you will change its end index because the start index comparison was done when you sorted the intervals. So you don't need to take the min of start indices because it's already done. You have to just compare the end indices. So output minus 1, 1, that is the last index in the output. You compare last end and you take the max with current end. So whatever is max will be taken as the last index and the merge happens, okay? If say suppose there is no overlap. If there is no overlap, in that case you just append the interval to the output. And how do you append? As a list start, comma, end. And finally you have done everything. You just need to return the output. So the time complexity for this solution would be O of n log n. Space complexity would be O of 1 because you're not using any additional space. Let's run and see if this works. So it's accepted. Let's submit. So it's a good solution, right? I'll quickly walk you through the solution once more so that you understand it clearly. We first do the sort using the key as start index of all the intervals. For the start index, I take I0. For end index, it's I1. Now, I will initialize the output variable with the list and first interval in the sorted intervals. And I will do the compare of last index of this with the start index of next interval. That's what I'm doing in the next row. So I pick up for start, end in intervals 1 and so on. So I will not pick up 0 and so on because I have taken 0 in the output itself. And I will define the end index last end equal to last input interval in the output and its end index. So output minus 1 would be the last interval in the output and its one value would be its end index. So I define last end. And then I'll compare this last end with start of next interval. If start of next interval is less than equal to last end, in that case there is an overlap. So you have to change the max value of output minus 1, 1. That is in the output, whatever your last interval was has an overlap with the next interval. So you will change its last index to max of last end of the output, comma, end of current interval. Whatever is max, that will take place in the output's last index. And that's how the merge happens. If say suppose there is no overlap, So in that case, you just append the interval like this and you return your output. I hope the question is clear to you. If you like my way of solving the problem, please subscribe to my channel Accelerate AI Careers. That helps me a lot, keeps me encouraged to make more videos. If you have any questions or a better approach to solve this question, mention them in the comments. I would love to learn from you. Thank you.